And we are live, or at least we should be. Okay, there it is. There's my live indicator. So, hi, everybody. We are here for another hashtag TQIF Tex-Trek live podcast recording session. We're going to be talking about something really cool and groovy. The new, not new, it's actually been around for a couple years, but new to Paramount Plus documentary all about Nichelle Nichols, and that's called Woman in Motion. So as soon as some people pop up, I see we got some people watching now. We're just going to go ahead and kick things off. I'm Fathery.
This is Dave.
And I'm Katie.
And this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 144th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom, from deep in the heart of Texas, where we have deep talks about Star Trek. And today, some Star Trek adjacent material. We're going to be talking about the Woman in Motion documentary about Nichelle Nichols, specifically her work with NASA, which is now streaming here in the United States on Paramount Plus. And just before we get started, I just would like to do a little housekeeping and say that people are asking, what's coming up next? We're actually going to be on hiatus next week. Nothing new coming out Friday, June 11th. So we're kicking that week off. But then Dave and I shall return on June 18th to kick off 3 weeks of Deep Space Nine talk. We're going to be going into Deep Space Nine Season 4. So you have that to look forward to. And in the meantime, we're going to be talking about this documentary, though, and we have a guest, first time on the show, joining us. Katie is here with us. Hi,
Howdy.
Katie.
Hi.
I was about to wave to Katie, and then I was like, "It's good." Then I'm going to look like I'm the guest. I'm like, "Yeah, it's me, the guest."
Hey,
Sorry.
Katie.
Hi, Katie. Yeah, we're glad to have you here because we would have looked like a couple of buffoons if we were talking about a documentary called Woman in Motion and didn't bother to find an actual woman to talk about it. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy life to join us today.
Well, I appreciate the invitation.
And you're fun to talk to. We've done a stream together before on our friend Starfleet Boys channel one time.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember that. It was a while ago. But so glad to have you here. Whenever me and Dave bring on a new guest, we do like to ask, how did you get into Star Trek? What was kind of your Star Trek introduction?
I watched Star Trek as a child. My mom was a huge Trekkie and a huge sci-fi fan. She read sci-fi out the wazoo, and she was the one who watched Star Trek. So I was the tag along and grew up with it, basically.
What show was
in the
she
blood.
watching?
The original.
And
Right on.
Did the two of y'all watch any of the other shows together, or did you explore those on your own?
I definitely explored that. My mom didn't stay with me all my life, so but she passed in the 80s or something. But I kept watching. I think I'm a Captain Kirk will always be my favorite, but I watched them all along, and I still watch them periodically, especially with Evan. Yeah.
Any standout characters? You mentioned Kirk, but anyone else, or any standout episodes that you're particularly fond of?
I mean, it's got to be. As a woman, it's always Nichelle. And obviously being a woman, it was amazing to see that first kiss and know how that changed the culture of acceptance and everything like that. So, even if that wasn't my favorite episode to watch, that has to be my favorite episode.
What? Plato's Stepchildren isn't your favorite episode to watch? That's crazy. I thought everyone loves that one.
It's funny. I think, pre-internet, when I was growing up in the 80s and maybe even watching reruns in the 70s, I don't know quite when it would have been. I at some point fairly early on in my life, I was aware that kiss was kind of historic, and I don't know quite how. I'm sure it was from my brother telling me about it, and he probably read about it in like Starlog magazine or something like that. But I knew even as a kid, or at least as a teenager, that it was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, even just the show in general, having different cultures on the deck, it just made like, oh, that's how it is, right? So it just made, but it wasn't like that in real life, right? So I think it led the way to our mindset of being just more accepting in general.
What's Kirk's line? No room for bigotry on this bridge.
Leave your bigotry in your quarters, I think.
That's it. Probably shouldn't leave it there either, but I knew what he meant. I knew what he meant.
The airlock, mister.
Well, all right. Shall we dive on in?
Absolutely, yeah. So, Woman in Motion. I guess forgotten that this documentary was made, but I guess it was made in like 2019, and it kind of got a lot of attention now because Paramount Plus, the home of all the modern Star Trek shows here in the United States, and also all the classic shows as well, they're all streaming there. But they put this on their platform, which I think is probably a good place for it. And even though it's not a new episode of Star Trek, we're going to kind of treat it like one and just talk about it like we talk about all the new content they've been releasing the last few years. But I had not seen it before. Had either one of y'all watched this documentary before?
Mm-mm.
No, it was essentially new to me. I remember hearing about it, like I think here and there. But yeah, completely new to me, and much of her story was new to me. There's a few big anecdotes that I think most people in fandom know about, and I'm sure we'll talk about them. But her history as a dancer, and some of the luminaries she met, and a lot of great stories that are told, and really the entire NASA connection was new to me. I can't believe I was that in the dark about so much of that stuff, but.
I actually knew about the NASA connection for a while now, but what I didn't know is that she began as a dancer and wanted to be a ballerina. That was new to me.
So I was in kind of the opposite boat. Like I was pretty familiar with her early days and her early career and how she got involved in Star Trek. And so kind of like that first 30 minutes or so of the documentary is kind of like, oh yeah, I already know all this stuff. But then the work that she did with NASA, I was completely unaware of how involved she was and how active she was and how many people she was able to recruit. The fact that the recruitment numbers went up from something like 1,000 to 8,000 when her company got involved. And when they eventually talk about the Challenger tragedy, 3 of those 7 astronauts were people that she had recruited. I was like, man. Oh wow, like she had like a big impact, specifically I guess on the Space Shuttle Program, which started in the late 70s. But yeah, I thought that she was just kind of like a PR head and that stuff. Kind of what she says in the documentary, like she was kind of reluctant at first because she didn't want people to think it was just like a gimmick, think like, oh, they just got like this actor to like do their commercials, and like that's kind of what I just always assumed, I guess. I had no idea that it was this big of a deal. So I'm grateful to have this documentary to kind of expose all this and tell the story of it.
Well, they explained, I think, if I'm not mistaken, her campaign lasted only like sort of 4 months, but it was this very intense sounding thing where she's crossing the country like many, many, many times over. And just like, it sounded like it was just like a bundle of energy every day. So, well, and we'll go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, what I was going to say, it's not that it lasted, it wasn't like, oh, it only lasted 4 months. She only had 4 months to do as much as she could.
Right. Right. It wasn't like it got canceled or something like that. That was the allotted time.
They're like, here's your time frame. Good luck. And she just charged it.
Yeah. If I could do the things I'm trying to do in life with that sort of energy and in a short span, I feel like that my success rate would be insane. It's really wild. But Father, do we want to talk a little bit of what's that?
she had a lot of drive. She was very passionate about it.
Absolutely.
Well, she knew she was changing the world. If you knew you could change the world, you'd be like, all right, I'm doing whatever I can.
No, that's probably a good way to sort of segue a little bit to the younger years, and just kind of discuss maybe a few of the things that happen or mentioned in the documentary. Because I think there's a bit of past history that suggests why she might have that drive.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Me too.
She has like these frustrations with her work on Star Trek, and I think that might have kind of that fueled her maybe like a little bit of anger, but also like some drive to help make the world a better place, at least in terms of representation. As someone who felt like she didn't get enough opportunity on that show, but yeah, that was really cool how like they kind of started off talking about like her childhood in Chicago, and she met Duke Ellington.
Yeah. Oh, I guess I wanted to just quick mention even before that she kind of came from her parents were like from different social strata, and like she said, her dad was very well to do and her mom wasn't, but he like was not going to let that get in her way, and even brought that up sometimes when the mom was like, oh, don't fill her, get her head in the clouds, and the dad was like, if people didn't try and do things that seemed impossible, I wouldn't have married you, because apparently it was very much, there was a lot of pushback against it.
That's when you were talking about, her drive to do this kind of stuff. I thought of her dad telling her like, look, you can do anything. You can do anything. And so she felt that. And so it seemed like she was upset that other people didn't feel that too. And so she was able to, because of what she did with NASA, she was like, hey, you can do anything too. Like she kind of spread what her dad gave to her as a child. That's what I thought, that in part with the being frustrated on Star Trek, I think it was like a beautiful marriage of those two things that really like helped, be who she was,
She mentioned at some point that she felt growing up that she could do anything. She wanted to be like the first Black ballerina, and her parents seemed like they were very encouraging. And then that like Star Trek was both like this great thing and also a wall in a way, like just so much opportunity, and then it was like reined in and suffocated. So of course she would find this other outlet, but it seems like she was always sort of pushing. One of y'all tell us the story about like Duke Ellington. It's kind of cool.
Oh, well, yeah, she got like her first, or perhaps it was just one of her first jobs, like on stage performing. But he wanted her to do a ballet on stage while he was playing his music. And
imagine that's like your first big gig is a ballet for Duke Ellington, where he's playing the piano and shit. Oh my god!
And then when the singer got sick, she had to step up and fill in for the singer, because she was, she was a little lucky, starting off. Like she came across Duke Ellington, and she's also like a very talented dancer, very, very talented singer. And it kind of sounds like her dad might have had like the money to like get her some training as a kid and was encouraging though. But yeah, more importantly, I guess like he was encouraging her to pursue this stuff. So she did catch a few lucky breaks there, but yeah, that was really cool to like see them explore that. And then she was also kind of.
Well, I just wanted to mention there's a funny bit in there where she says, it's just a funny anecdote. It humanizes her, I think. She talked about admiring this sort of sultry songstress like the night, in the weeks before she had to take her place. And that it sounded like this lady's act that she took over for. She was very much vamping it up like Jessica Rabbit and Roger Rabbit, all twined around the microphone, very sexy kind of act. And that she tried to do this sort of the same thing just to mimic her, but that it apparently went over quite well with the crowd. But Duke Ellington was like, "Hey, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
You can be your own thing."
Stop trying to molest my mic stand. You can sing. You don't need to do that.
I love hearing her talk about the other musicians being like, "What is she doing?"
Oh yeah. They're like. I mean, but I just can't even imagine it when you're like, I know it's like an amazing break, but she was just asked to go and sing for the first time, like not for the first time in her life, but the first time for like Duke Ellington, with his act. The day of, I think. maybe the night before.
Yeah, she was like in the dressing room, and he was like, "Hey, can you sing? Hey, I need a singer. Get on stage."
It's nuts. When she was laughing about that reminds me of one of my other favorite things early on is they actually do this little just quick montage of just Nichelle Nichols laughing. And it's so good. She's like she has that vibrant spirit about her, that sort of joie de vivre thing. And like it's a very musical laugh. It's I don't know. It's honestly one of my favorite moments in the whole thing. Is just an early clip. I'm glad they chose to show it.
And did you hear her musical range when she gave?
Oh my God!
I know, it was impressive.
She did it when she was like at her present age when they made this, what 80s, 70s, and she suddenly just as she's like throws out some high notes. I'm not going to even try and mimic it because it's going to be horrible. But it was shocking because she had sort of a sultry voice, and she talked about her vocal range that that she was kind of born with, and obviously you trained to great degree.
She also kind of like lucked out in how she got into Star Trek because she never really saw herself as like a Hollywood type, but just in Los Angeles one day changing flights on her way to Hawaii. She's like, "Oh, this town is kind of neat. Guess I'll stick around." And
I don't know. It was more than kind of neat. She said she like fell in love with it.
She was like, "I love this place. I don't want to be anywhere else." And then she moved there. And she was like, "Oh, people act here? All right, I'll do that too."
Yeah. I forget how important this is, so I'm glad the documentary reminded me. But she was kind of there at like the earliest days of Star Trek when it was just kind of an idea that Gene Roddenberry was having. Because she was on the episode of Gene Roddenberry's earlier show, The Lieutenant. And
I don't know anything about that.
They talk about this a little bit.
What was The Lieutenant actually mostly about? What was it mostly about?
It was about Marines on like a Marine base, I think, in California. It wasn't like off at war. It was like at home.
So she was a guest star, and I saw she was kissing a guy in the clip who was also black. I think he was kind of lighter skinned, but he was black too, I think.
Yeah, she's the wife of a black Marine who can't get along with a white Marine because of like race relations, and that was considered too risque to put on TV in 1962 or whenever it was. So they didn't even air the episode.
Wow.
And Gene Roddenberry was
be a clearer sign that they needed to air the episode than that they couldn't air the episode.
Absolutely. But our friend Larry Nemechek, who's literally a Star Trek historian, the way he describes this was like that made Gene Roddenberry so mad that he created Star Trek so that he could have a setting to do those types of stories. Be like, I'll just do it in the future with like aliens and no one will care.
It's amazing. And
days.
she was a total inspiration for her own character in name and in like creation.
Oh, right. Yeah. So that's probably common knowledge among fans, but I guess I didn't know that either. It was a book, right?
Yes. There was the Swahili word for freedom.
Uhuru. Right.
When she auditioned for Spock because they hadn't even written her character yet.
Right, she was just reading lines.
Yeah, I think they just had her read for Spock.
Right, I guess like Roddenberry. What was it? It was kind of like Roddenberry wanted to have a role for her, and they just kind of wanted to see if she could act. I guess
they didn't have any sides.
Yeah, they didn't have any lines. She didn't have a personality. There was no lines. Like there was nothing created other than like character number 7.
Yeah,
she also had another relationship with. Like, there's another side to her relationship with Gene Roddenberry that the documentary doesn't go into, but I mean, he was having an affair with her, which I think is fairly public knowledge now. So like that was probably a big part, like why she was like front and center in his mind and why he was like getting a job for her. Same thing with the other woman he was cheating on his wife with, Majel Barrett, was also given a job on Star Trek. But
yeah. Sometimes the path to greatness is a winding one.
Different times then too, like looser boundaries of love.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure, absolutely.
I'm
and
honestly, these talented women on board in the franchise, so it worked out. At least he wasn't like picking up some chicks who like couldn't act and then trying to like give them jobs.
Jesus. Yeah, that would have been the worst sin, is to pick up some untalented people to cheat with.
I wonder what came first, the affair or the talent, or if he was like, oh, talent, all right, I can have an affair with that, or if he was like, oh, I'm having an affair, oh, you're talented.
You know, it did seem like he wanted people to like him. Maybe it was just to be a sounding board. He might have been all ego. You know, I know that that's part of who he was. But she mentions that he would like talk politics with her all the time. And so this is a guy clearly was always wanting to engage with the world and wanting to engage with the people he knew or was in relationships with on the topic. So I hope he valued her input and was not just blah 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 to hear his own thoughts.
Since you're talking about politics, can we talk about how Martin Luther King told her to keep the role? That's amazing.
Oh,
Yeah.
We should mention her frustrations on the original series when they weren't giving Uhura as big of a part as she was originally led to believe.
Yeah.
Do you want to go roll with the story, Katie?
Well, she was frustrated with the part because they weren't giving her as much as she wanted. And, you know, one of the things she said, they were like, what was your favorite episode? And she said, anytime I was off the deck, you know, which says a lot. But she was ready to quit. She was talking to Martin Luther King and he was like, no, you can't quit. You know, you're basically a symbol and an inspiration to people and you have to stay on there.
Yeah, I think he was explaining like that, you know, even just her presence was meaningful. And I mean, God, I guess when Martin Luther King talks, you gotta listen.
You listen.
But she was so ballsy. She was even like, she said that she was thinking like, now who is this guy to tell me like what job I can and can't do?
Yeah,
she did listen to him.
Actually, I like throughout the whole documentary, she's got this what's the Yiddish word, chutzpah. She's got this energy and honestly faith in herself. She's got a self-confidence that comes through. It's not arrogance at all. It's just it's a little bit of sassy self-awareness about she's not gonna be talked down to.
Yeah.
Oh, in fact, where was it? That's right. I actually jotted this down. When she's talking about when she was almost going to leave the show, one of the interviewers, you kind of hear him say off screen, she's like, and you weren't about the weakness of the role. She's like, he's like, and you weren't having it. And she's like, would Uhura? And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And it is unfortunate because they actually were planning on giving her a bigger part in the beginning when Gene Roddenberry was creating the show. He wanted to have more spotlight on some of the secondary characters. And from what I understand, it was more of an influence from the other producer, Gene L. Coons, who wrote some amazing stories. But his idea was to keep the spotlight on McCoy, Spock, and Kirk, and everyone else was much less important. So that I can understand her being mad about that when, you know, she's someone who kind of views acting as kind of a secondary thing. Like she's more primarily thinks of herself as like a stage person, or, you know, working in music or singing, dancing, whatever. And so she could probably, get fed up real fast if like, oh, like I don't even want to do this that much, and they're not even let me do it what I want to do. So I kind of do want a different job. But I'm glad she stayed because I think that kind of, if she would have left after 2 seasons, I don't know if they would have like made it a priority to bring her back in the animated series or the movies, and Uhura might not have been one of the like the prominent 7 original series people. So I am glad that she did stay and kind of solidify her place there
to icon status somewhere in there,
which allowed her to do everything with NASA. You know, it was a springboard for her to, you know, be an inspiration even further.
So let's talk about how that happened. She was at a convention.
The 1975 convention, which was in her hometown of Chicago.
Was it a sci-fi convention or Star Trek specific?
It was a Star Trek specific convention, from what I understand. Back then in the 70s, I think they were doing like one big convention every year, And that's what I guess they're going back to starting next year in Chicago again, when they're doing Mission Chicago in April, which is going to be the big official convention. And then they promise to like do a different one every year after that, but in different cities across the country. So that is like a little bit more of a kind of old school thing that they used to do in the 70s.
What was, I forget, she was on, was it a panel? There was a NASA guy there.
The NASA guy was there. He was doing a presentation. He was doing a panel. And his name was Jesko von Puttkamer.
And she does it. She tells the story in his German accent. When I was
like, yeah.
Yes.
Well, she can do voices. She did a lot of voices on the animated series. A lot of times, if like they needed like a female alien, and like Majel couldn't do it, they'd be like, Nichelle, can you like do like some weird voice?
And the guy kind of confesses, like, I think he says, like he was there at the convention because of like Star Trek's qualities, but also to check out like Uhura's legs.
I wanted to see if her legs were as sexy as I think they are. Like, what was his quote?
It was something like that.
Yeah,
I will say, I wanted to mention that if for any out there, for the many out there who find Uhura, find Nichelle Nichols very attractive, this is a great documentary to watch because there's a lot of very beautiful photographs of her throughout it, especially like in her dancing days, and really like you can see her athleticism, her beauty, her sexiness. It's a pretty some remarkable visuals. So you'll see where Von what's his name was coming from.
Von Puttkamer.
Von Puttkamer, yes.
Yeah, that ridiculous name. It sounds like a cartoon scientist that just want to name like the most ridiculous thing ever. But yeah, that kind of started her on her whole crusade, because at the time in 1975 there were no women astronauts.
Right. She said she was like watching, I guess, his presentation and really taken with this, that sort of energy and the vibrancy of space exploration with it. But she was keenly aware that women and minorities were poorly represented in like all the visuals, I guess, she was seeing.
But what happened when she went to NASA? Didn't she say that there was more diversity than she thought, but it wasn't represented when it was presented?
Exactly. Yeah, it was like not publicly promoted, really.
Yeah, NASA had kind of like made a change internally. They had kind of like recognized the issue, and they did have like a lot of women, working in administrative positions and other technical positions and all kinds of stuff. But there had not yet been any women astronauts, and they kind of, it sounded like they were very open to having like an ambassador to go and like help them recruit.
Well, they didn't even know. They were like, how do we do it? She's like, you need to advertise this.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. You get the feeling of like kind of a bunch of stiff kind of engineers and nerds, and they're like, how do we get people to like us? And she's like, well, you get out there and talk to them, and she's so personable and everything that she seemed like the ended up being the ideal person for the job.
And what I thought was interesting was that it sounded like the military had really controlled astronaut recruitment for a long time. And I'd never heard this before, but they had like this old woman pilot who was talking about the Mercury space program, which goes all the way back, started in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And during the Mercury program, when they were, I guess the Air Force was testing pilots or testing candidates to be astronauts, they tested like 150 something men and found like only 27 or something of them qualified. And then they tested like 50 women, and there was actually more women that qualified than the men, which I thought was very interesting. And they didn't recruit any of them though.
Right, because you had to have actual like flight time experience in those days
as a test pilot.
As a test pilot, and it was literally just prohibited for women.
You know what my favorite quote of the whole movie was? So she was asked by a reporter. He was like, "Oh, how do you think women would fare in this man's world?" And she was like, "This isn't a man's world."
Yeah, he had that very leading question, which is like, if you all those old interviews. I see this all the time. I remember I was watching an interview with Helen Mirren, and the questions are sexist. Like they're kind of like couched in a, like, well, this is just how it is, right? And I love when there's pushback. I know it wasn't easy. Like, it wasn't easy to have that kind of energy and pushback in those days.
Yeah, she just looked him straight in the eye and she was like, "This isn't a man's world."
Yeah, it's great. They talked about, like NASA was essentially kind of a boys' club with all those, like, 50s test pilot guys out of the military, a lot of Air Force guys, or all Air Force guys, I guess. And so, let's see, I'm trying to think. They, what she ended up doing was essentially, well, she formed her own company somewhere in there, literally called Women in Motion.
Mm-hmm.
Not Women in Motion, which was, as I understood it, was like initially like maybe sort of like an educational venture, but became part of this recruitment drive, and started kind of like, just actively going out and speaking to recruits, and especially focusing on women and people of color.
Yeah, and she was hitting up college campuses and like
toured universities and
different organizations, like women organizations, or different organizations for different minority groups, or people of color, as we would call them today. But yeah, just kind of like getting the word out, because there had never been like a drive to recruit astronauts from like the civilian sector. It had always been something that the military had always kind of controlled.
Mm-hmm. I jotted down, Father, you mentioned at the top of the podcast the some of the numbers, and I think she said that this is what they said, that in an 8-month period of recruiting prior to Nichelle stepping in, that there were 1,500 astronaut applications. Only 100 were from women and 35 from minorities. When she finished, after this 4-month period, there were over 8,000 applications. Over 1,600 of them were from women. That's actually more than all of the astronaut applications in the previous 8 months. And over 1,000 of those were from minorities. So it's just, like an insane drive.
Yeah. So it's pretty empirical, I guess, that she had the winning strategy for what they were trying to accomplish.
The proof was in the pudding. Yeah. The thing that's both like amazing, it's like really beautiful early on, and then very, very sad when they talk about the people that she knew on the Challenger, is that she says that the recruits were like children, like her own children. And it's really very touching both times she talks about it. First, just like in a very joyous way, and then in a very sad way later.
I cried.
Yeah,
I'll admit
it was tough. It was tough.
I remember watching the Challenger explode on television when I was little, and it was a big moment. It was like, I feel like it was our Kennedy moment.
Same. I was I was like in I think 5th grade, and I can remember roughly about what class I was and everything at the time. And it was kind of one of those things where to kids at the time, NASA was kind of something that was, I don't know, sort of just pure and sort of good. And like, I only ever saw positive things from them. I didn't even know about like sort of some of the tragic deaths early on. And then to have that happen, sort of while everyone was watching, was brutal.
And then, that group of people really represented America, right? It was all colors, all different nationalities. And, just and for kids at that time to look and be like, I could be that. And you could be anybody and look at those group of people and say, I could do that too, was such a big deal back then. And to see it like it's like, almost like explode in your face. It was a little jaunting. It was very jaunting.
I mean, yeah, it's a testament to the perseverance of all the people involved, that they were basically able to get back on the saddle and keep going, and still make all these amazing voyages. But yeah, it like, you can't imagine like a rougher sort of setback.
I thought that was kind of cool how they cut in the risk is our business speech from Captain Kirk.
Yeah.
About, because there was like a 2.5-year gap where there were no American space flights, and then and then when they did start using the space shuttles again in September of '88.
I like seeing that.
That was really cool.
I liked seeing that scene. They also did a neat thing where during the opening credits, where they move from like footage of NASA stuff to a star field, and then the star field becomes the opening of Star Trek with the very famous theme music.
Then they cut to Star Trek Las Vegas. But what excited me in the opening credits is when it shows like the spaceships and stuff. It kind of made me think of like the Enterprise opening credits when it opens with astronauts and has like a terrible
what's your favorite theme song?
With the worst song ever recorded. But I was just thinking, like, if
everybody's got to acknowledge the
context,
visuals in the opening of Enterprise are very heartening.
But if I saw this opening credit like out of context, like if I could take it back in time and show it to myself and see like the names in the credits, it's like Michael Dorn and Walter Koenig, I'd be like, oh, is this like a new Star Trek movie or something? And then it says Martin Luther King the Third. Al Sharp. I would have been like, what the hell kind of movie is this? It would have freaked me out a little bit.
I mean, we haven't mentioned it, but yeah, of course, there's all sorts of guests in there sort of doing testimonials and reflections. A lot of people who worked with her, but like John Lewis is in there, and
Ahsoka is in there.
Is that right?
Yeah, Ashley Eccleston, I think the voice actress who did Ahsoka in the Star Wars cartoons on Clone Wars and Rebels. Right. Yeah, she was in there for some reason.
And then there's also just lots of some there's fandom in there too. That they talk about. She talked about early on that mixture of sort of fantasy and fact, and sort of the way her life would end up sort of blurring those, which is pretty cool. And to think about, like, you're both putting on like these stories that sort of push at least our imaginations forward and make us engage with these sort of thoughts and then ideas about morality, but that actually have like a concrete influence, with their direct sort of lineage through NASA is I mean, really pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to have like these optimistic depictions of the future, like Star Trek, because if we can't imagine it, if all we can imagine are like all these other dystopian sci-fi futures, then how can we ever hope to achieve something better in reality if we can't even like have it in our imaginations?
That's so true. Right? It's leading by example. It's like we watch something, we're like, we can do that too, but like you're saying, if we keep seeing this dystopian things, we'll when we interact with something, we're like, it's gonna go to hell.
It reminds
me of the limitation on Star Trek, where they didn't give her as big of a role that she wanted. She was probably like, well, what the hell? I'm gonna make all these other people have like a bigger role in real life.
Yeah. Talk about paying it forward, I'm not that altruistic. No, I work at it. But it is inspirational. What's I gonna say? They also there was a bit in there where they showed the launch of the first space shuttle, the Enterprise, and the launch was like sort of screened, or they had the original Star Trek cast on hand.
Yeah,
and
it wasn't a launch. They just kind of wheeled it out.
That's right. It was kind of a promotional sort of thing.
Yeah, that's the one that never went into space. The other four all did, but that one
it did do like a test. They've done tests. Essentially what do you call it? Like non-orbital flights.
Yeah, it like piggybacked on the carrier plane that would transport them around.
But Walter Koenig is in that section, and he says that he was like, suddenly they were part of something real, and I thought that was also very cool.
That was awesome. Yeah. And then I liked when Nichelle was going through all the astronaut training, right? And she landed.
Oh yeah.
Remember? And she landed it perfectly. And they were like, "How did you do that?" And she was like, "That wasn't me." Right? That was my character.
Yeah, she's like, that was Uhura.
Uhura did it. Yeah. Yeah. She landed the simulator.
This was before she. I guess her notion was before she was going to start recruiting for them. She wanted a better idea, maybe a little bit more of a hands-on as to like what she was going to be asking people to do, what it meant to be an astronaut. And so there's a lot of so basically she did a lot of the training. She wore a flight suit, they took her through all that, which is also like had to be a thrill, probably a little bit grueling.
Yeah, that she meant business. Like she was taking it very serious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was. I think she. I mean, one, she probably wanted to do it because I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? And
Right.
two, it was like, oh, I'm going to show that I'm a woman of color and a woman, and this is possible, right? Because when you see somebody do something, you're like, oh, if they could do it, I could do it too. And she probably, in her marketing mind, was like, this needs to happen so that people see that it's possible.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if they had any, like, when she would be on campus and stuff, if there was, like, any photos of herself in those, in the spacesuit or in the simulator or anything like that. That'd
That's
be cool.
Good question. I wonder if there's any, like, if anybody has any, like
Like
photos.
the materials?
Yeah.
Or photos
they
and
had
stuff?
some footage of that in the thing.
But
in the
like,
documentary.
somebody who was actually on campus and saw her and then was like, oh, let me put a photo of me and her, Nichelle, and she's in her outfit.
It was also cool
question.
because all that stuff was at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and I've actually, Dave, have you ever been there? Have you
I've not.
toured it? Yeah, like that big
Definitely on my to-do.
pool, and they don't have that big pool for like the 0G training. Someone was telling me the other day they actually like have like a new one in Pasadena, Texas that they use now. But when she's walking around with that other astronaut who's the commander from Apollo 12, like those buildings they're walking around, like they're still there in Houston. Like people can go still tour those. So that was cool. That made it seem like even more, I guess, like connected to my life. It's like, oh yeah, like I've been there.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Walking the footsteps.
This might be a really dumb question from me, but is there really a hologram of her at a museum where she talks about what she's done, or like the space program? Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Was that a thing in there?
Not that I know of.
I think I might have blinked and missed it.
It was towards the end because it was talking about when she started the STEM programs.
Right.
And then it was like it was a commercial of her, and there was that little girl, and all the kids got off the bus, and then they went to the museum.
Yeah, that was in Washington. That was at the Smithsonian Museum of like Air and Space Flight or whatever it's called.
So is it really a hologram of her?
I don't know. I didn't see that when I was there. I think that was just something that they were doing back then in the 70s.
They should make that happen. We
should
start a petition.
She's in her uniform from the motion picture, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which came out in December of '79. So that must have been like the early '80s, which would have been, I guess, like after she'd done this recruitment drive, which I think most of the recruitment of it happened in '77. I think I might be a little wrong on some of these dates, but that's kind of when NASA was gearing up for the Space Shuttle Program. I don't know when the first launch was. I think maybe 81.
That sounds right. 80 or 81.
Yeah.
But yeah, she had a big influence on that entire program, or at least like that first decade of it.
Yeah, all this time I didn't know that she was kind of like NASA royalty.
Yeah, she's like she's kind of like the mother of like that space shuttle astronaut generation. After Apollo had shut down and NASA transitioned into the space shuttle.
Well, yeah, she said she thought of them as her kids, so that makes her their mom.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
What I thought was cool when they were the astronauts were talking about going into space, and he was like, "Oh, I wish I could get all the politicians up here so they could look down on Earth and understand that all the inhabitants were not these like different types of people. We're all just inhabitants on one planet." And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of what Star Trek was trying to." Say to people throughout the time, and it's like, come up here and you look down, it's one. It's
Yeah. When I was growing up, I realized, not that I've ever thought about it like quite at the time, but that a lot of the sort of early sort of morality of Star Trek that would come through was crossing over with some of the science stuff. Like I'd watch Carl Sagan's Cosmos and stuff as a kid, and he'd talk about the Earth as what's the blue dot? I forget.
Yeah, pale blue dot.
Pale blue dot. Yeah. Where it's sort of it should be this sort of humbling, unifying thing, and the space exploration should kind of you want it to be this thing that brings us together, and our fiction showed it as this thing. It's convincing the rest of the world that they should see it that way. That's a little difficult at times.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that too. I think that was Colonel Frederick Gregory. And he was the astronaut who said he was actually like Air Force dude, but
Yeah.
he joined through the civilian recruitment because he said like they wouldn't have picked me if I went through the military route.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
I love that.
He saw the commercial. He saw the commercial and he says like he's joking, but he's like she pointed at me and she's like NASA needs you, and I was like yes ma'am, I'll go and apply.
One of the other exciting things about the documentary is just to see, these people of color in these, that were pilots and astronauts and all this, just reflecting on it. It's a reminder that, that like how much representation matters. And, it's just great to see these guys out there. They have that, they all have that sort of NASA can-do attitude, which is always cool to see too.
Yeah, and it's when they would talk about, oh, we're all family, and when I forget who said that, they're like, we all got together and we're all family, and it immediately reminded me of it's not what you look like, it's how you almost think and what your actions are, because if you think about all these NASA people, their brains are kind of all think the same way. They're like super mechanical and methodical, and so of course they're all the same because that's how they think. But it didn't matter who what they were on the outside. They just all had that crazy brain on the inside.
Yeah, the very much kind of a representation of the meritocracy that Trek portrays for us.
And the Space Shuttle Program was kind of the first opportunity to really, start putting a lot of people into space. Because before that, with Mercury and with Apollo, we're only sending like one dude or two or three dudes at a time. And and they were only recruiting those test pilot dudes in the Air Force. So
I hadn't thought about what that transition really meant until I saw this documentary. That there was a time when like NASA was kind of like they said in the 70s. They were downsizing. That it was a time of a general malaise for the country and like an economic downturn. So. The fact that they were able to eke up an opportunity out of this is itself also pretty impressive. It was not an easy time to do it, but it was a time when NASA was overtly trying to do it, that they actually wanted to.
And a part of that might have just been, shame of like being like outdone. They mentioned like the Russians had already been sending women into space, and then they sent some people of color into space too. Like it's kind of like a troll move to the United States. Like they were seeing like Vietnamese guys. They'd get like, oh, look, like this little country Vietnam that like beat you in a war. We're sending them into space. Like, y'all can't even get like anyone but like these white dudes up there. So I think that was like a part of it too.
It's funny how competition drives change and evolution.
Yeah, sometimes it's a sort of fearful or even bitter competition, but it sometimes that's what works. So
Yeah, just like I think of Nichelle, and it's she got into it because the scientists wanted to see her sexy legs, and it's like, okay, whatever it works. If you gotta get there.
The door. She stuck her leg into that door and then pushed it open and let all the other women and people of color in behind her.
There's a line in the end. It's really moving. That someone says, she went into it an actress. She ended up changing the world. So yeah, there was something else I wanted to mention, which was that I know, I've just kind of heard sort of through the grapevine. I haven't really been to Trek conventions, but I knew that Nichelle Nichols might have been in like a little bit of mental decline, or maybe even serious mental decline in recent years. And I don't know when this documentary was. It was released like 2 years ago initially.
Yes,
and may have been filmed in over a course of a couple years prior to that. If I had to guess,
the latest footage in it was probably, I would assume, like 2018, give or take a year.
Yeah, but I can say that she was extremely cogent. Like she was like whip smart, on the spot, funny, energetic, and all those things. I'm sure she probably has even then could have been struggling, good days and bad and that kind of thing. But like when you see this, you'll see the best of her and you'll see that strength.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it made me. It was kind of bittersweet for me to watch that because I really enjoyed seeing it. You know, it does make me sad to think that like she's less healthy now.
Yeah.
But
her passion was,
No.
I mean, her passion was so strong. You know what I mean? Like, even if like whatever was happening in the world outside of the camera, it didn't matter because her passion was so strong in that moment. And I was thinking the same thing. It's like this beautiful, strong, passionate woman. We all get old and it doesn't last forever, but it's so cool because what she's done and her image and everything, it is going to last. So it was a bittersweet watch.
It is. The documentary itself doesn't particularly address any of that. It's just kind of there, you know. It's you can't help but, you know, kind of acknowledge it. I really like how they end in the credits. They let her. She sings. She sings. What is it Sinatra's song?
Yeah, Fly Me to the Moon.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, like that voice is just as good as ever.
Yeah, she still has some pipes when they shot that, for sure.
Yeah, and that's nuts.
She looks so casual doing it. Like she just looks like so comfortable in the recording booth, and it's just kind of like casually just reading the words off the page.
500th time or farther down the line in a recording booth. I'm sure she's probably more comfortable there than she maybe ever was on, like, you know, movie sets and stuff.
It's true.
And more valued in some ways. So.
I just want to point out in our live chat audience, we have Dr. BNNC. Thanks for joining us, who is pointing out that Dr. Mae Jemison was not just a fan and friend, the first African-American woman astronaut. She was a mission specialist, launched multiple times, and she used the phrase hailing frequencies are open at the start of her shifts. She was Lieutenant Palmer in Next Generation Second Chances, and she was also
they showed her.
Nichelle. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and there was someone else who appeared in Star Trek. There's a male astronaut who showed up at one point. There's been a few. Trek gets some of the big cameos sometimes. We're lucky that the franchise is enjoyed by like so many high profile people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, that's the credit of the franchise. It's more than just luck. I mean, it's the effort that people put into it.
Oh, and we should comment. This is one of my favorite parts of it. Was Whoopi Goldberg briefly shows up? Who Whoopi tells like this famous story of like watching Star Trek and seeing Nichelle Nichols on there, excited her as a kid, and she went running through her house yelling for her mom. You know, mom, come look at the TV. There's a black lady on TV, and she ain't no maid. I've heard Whoopi tell this story so many times, and they had footage of the 2016 Star Trek Las Vegas, which was, I wasn't there, but I heard it was like a big one. It was the 50th anniversary. A lot of people showed up, and they had Whoopi and Nichelle together on stage. And I wish to hell like I could have been there because I would have loved to have seen that with my own eyes. Yeah, I thought that was like so cool to see, like, you know, like Whoopi like fangirl for Nichelle like in person on stage in front of a huge audience would just be a really cool thing to be a part of.
That was such a great moment. You're right. That was a major like standout moment. And then when she was like, "This isn't about me, it's about you," you know, she said that, Nichelle was like, "Oh,
yeah." It's kind of like she's like, "Sorry, Nichelle, you're just gonna have to sit here and be complimented."
Whoopi Goldberg coming soon to Star Trek Picard season 2, or so we've been told.
Right
Something to look forward to. Were there any other key moments for y'all that really stood out that we haven't touched on?
I think I mentioned most of the big ones for me in my notes. I'm kind of skimming through them now to see if there was anything else. But I think I hit most of the stuff that I wanted to kind of be sure. Oh, you know what? There is one other thing. Here's one. Neil deGrasse Tyson at one point he was just talking about the role she played on the show, or the role Star Trek played. This is actually even somewhat separate from Nichelle Nichols. And he says that I kind of liked how he put it. He says the fact that it was set in a distant time and place gave it access to the present in a way storytelling of the present would not.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just a nice, really cogent way of putting it about like what Trek could do.
What the lieutenant couldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always say it's a show in the future, but it's about today. I think that's something that Trek often aspires to be.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes, you know, and this was the only way you can guarantee safety is to never launch. You know, because after the Challenger, they were like, we have to keep going, and it just makes you realize, like, oh, you know, you'll never be safe. If you need to move forward, you'll never be safe, but that's okay because you have to launch. I was like, that was really inspiring.
Yeah, that ethos is impressive as hell.
Yeah, and people who are into Star Trek tend to be like into space exploration, so it's a cool little connective tissue that most of us
honestly,
will enjoy.
I'd like to. It'd be kind of cool if they could tap into that again.
Yeah, I think,
in a more,
you know,
in like an overt sort of way, and not sort of in this sort of general way.
Well, it reminds me of I mean, just like general life, like, oh, I'm scared to go outside, or I'm scared to start this project, or I'm scared to like be an entrepreneur, right? So it's never safe, but you know, you'll never get it launched if you want to be safe.
Yeah, boldly go.
Boldly go.
It's right there in the opening.
Yeah, that's my family's motto, whatever the Latin is for like fortune favors the bold. I found when I went to Ireland, I was doing like some family history research. I was like, oh, like our motto was fortune favors the bold. But I like a bold or boldly go is the way I want to phrase it.
Yeah, nice and short and to the point.
The other thing that I wanted to point out that I thought was kind of neat was when they did like that little montage. It made me laugh of like all the times when she said hailing frequencies are open. It comes this like hammer in the point. like there are more hailing frequencies open than there are he's dead Jim or you know, I'm a doctor, not a whatever. Like she really did say that a whole lot. So I thought that was like well edited, and the whole thing it was kind of a pretty well produced documentary.
Yeah, I thought so. Like in general, I feel like this should just be like an automatic watch for Trekkies. I think like there's multiple reasons to see it, even if you're not a Trekkie. You know, for it's the historical, you know, value. Whether if you're a space junkie or you just want to see an inspiring story about an African American woman. You know, there's a lot of different angles, but I thought it was really well done. Good music. Kind of tugs at the heartstrings in a nice way. That's, I think, very Star Trek. So yeah, I think it is a pretty easy recommend.
Yeah, it has some production value behind it. It's not like some like little like Nat Geo made for TV thing. It's like like some money and effort went into making this thing.
Over in the comments, Jill47 says it's at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yes,
not too shabby.
So that's pretty good. But yeah, so those were our thoughts on Woman in Motion. But we would love to hear back from our viewers and listeners. If anyone wants to leave a comment or hit us up on Twitter or our email address and let us know like your thoughts on Woman in Motion. And again, as I said at the top of the show, we will be off next week. We don't have any new content coming out on the 11th, but the week after that, on the 18th, Dave and I shall return to Deep Space Nine to get into season 4. And we're going to break that up a little differently. We're going to do 3 weeks of season 4. We're going to do it in like little 8 or 9 episode chunks at a time.
Just let it breathe a little bit more.
Yeah. And there's a lot of juicy stuff that's going to happen. So we're going to want to focus on it. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Dave's seen it for the first time. I'm seeing it for the 47th time. The people who like those really like them. So if you haven't checked out our DS9 conversations, you know, we come at it with 2 pretty different perspectives, and I think we have some pretty fun conversations. I would listen to it.
I feel like people should, if only to see where my surmises about future events are wrong.
yeah. Listen to Dave. Listen to me try so hard to not give anything away because I hate spoiling things for people. And listen to Dave predict things wrongly.
Listen, I feel like my assessment of it, based on the information at hand, was good. But we'll get back to it. Katie, thank you for joining us.
Anytime.
That was
Yeah,
super
and it was
fun.
a lot of fun. And until next time, as always, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek, and follow Fathery on Twitter at txtrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you, and take